Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So I'd like to welcome everyone this evening. So nice to have everyone join. So this week here in Winnipeg, we had our first snowfall of the season. So I don't know if that officially counts that we're entering winter time now. We've had just little bits of snow coming the last couple days. So this morning at the monastery, after the Dhamma talk, we were having a discussion about this idea um, of having dukkha, a bit of suffering along the path of practice. So again, suffering isn't really a great translation for the word dukkha, because dukkha is it's quite a spectrum. It's everything from horrible, torturous suffering on one extreme, and then just stress, discontent, dissatisfaction on the other extreme. So one of the things is this idea of that, that dukkha is going to be coming up in our path of practice. Because a lot of times when people think about, Buddhist monks living out in the monasteries, living out in the forests of Thailand. A lot of people have, um, one of two extreme beliefs. So on one hand, people kind of think that, once we start practicing and become monks, we're living in this kind of like a semi-blissed out, kind of a little out of it, just, smiling and just kind of in just pure bliss upon bliss all day, all night. And um, and then on the other extreme, you have people who think that, they hear about a lot of the um, uh, physical austerities that, we experience as monks, in Thailand, like we, just sleep on a thin plastic mat on the floor. We wake up at 3 o'clock, morning chanting starts at 3:30. We live in the forest, in the tropics. We eat one meal a day. A lot of times, most of the dwellings don't have any electricity and the heat and the insects and all that. So people think it's, this very difficult, austere, torturous life. And it's really neither of those is quite accurate. But one of the things is, when we are and so there are, you are getting more happiness, but you're not just blissed down all the time. And there are physical hardships, and there are these certain amount of dukkha, of this um, stress, this unsatisfactory we go through in our lives. But in the course of practice, when we're practicing, we're developing, there's going to be a certain amount of this idea of, dukkha, which is there to overcome other dukkha. So sometimes, and it sounds kind of strange. So there is going to be this suffering, which is necessary to overcome another type of suffering, a stronger type of suffering. So in the Dhammapada, the Buddha talked about, this giving up a lesser happiness for a greater happiness. So, in the course of our practice, we're gonna have to come up against this, and this is gonna happen. So we're going to, when you especially see, for of course the extreme examples, when you become a monk, there's certain types of, happinesses that we have to give up. And there's a certain, whenever you give up something you want or something you were craving for, there's going to be some type of suffering. So when the Buddha was describing, suffering, part of what he was saying was like, um, uh, not getting those things we want, and then being associated with things we don't want. And, so this is anytime there is that, we want something, we're craving something, and we don't get it, there's going to be a little bit of suffering. So, for example, as monks, we don't watch TV, we don't, you know, um, We don't do any type of entertainment or music or jewelry. I mean, we don't even have hair. We had to give that up. And, for some people, that can be a lot of suffering. For me, it wasn't so bad. My hair was pretty short to begin with, so it wasn't a big sacrifice. But for some people, it really is. And so you have to give up a bit of those happinesses, a bit of those things, in pursuit of this greater happiness. And then through the course of our practice, there's going to be certain times when we are going to come up against a certain amount of suffering, a certain amount of things, we do have to push through. And so, for example, like in one of the like my favorite suttas, like the Sabbasava Sutta, which is the sutta on all the taints. And it's really interesting because the Buddha talks in it about um, he breaks it up into different ways to overcome different of these taints. And some of them you overcome by using, some of them you overcome by avoiding, and there's all these different ones. And there's this one group of them, you overcome by enduring, and was talking about that you have to endure certain things like heat and cold and the harsh words of other people. And he goes into this list of it, and it's really interesting because a lot of those things in other places in the suttas and our reflections and stuff, like for our reflecting on our robes and our dwellings, these are specifically to protect us from some of those things. The heat, protect us from heat and cold, and biting and crawling things, so like insects, lizards, all these types of things, these are to protect us from. But then on another part, the Buddha said, we have to also learn how to endure these things. So, when we're practicing, there's certain things we have to endure to get this greater happiness. So, we're not always going to be just, comfortable all the time. Things aren't always just going to feel great all the time. So, you could say, for example, when you're trying to sit meditation, you're sitting meditation and you're new to it, or, you've only been sitting for a certain length, and then, your legs get sore. And you're like, oh, okay, I'm a little sore, maybe I should just get up and finish. But then if you're able to, push that a little longer, you're like, okay, it's sore. Let's just try to push it a little longer. Let's try to increase the amount of time we sit meditation. And then initially in the beginning, it's going to be a certain amount of suffering. The body's suffering, the mind's not used to being calm for that period of time. So you're going to be a certain amount of discomfort's going to come up. But then once you're able to get through that and being able to sit longer, the happiness that you're getting from that longer meditation, that deeper meditation, it's going to be worth it in the long term. So it's kind of similar to like when someone wants to get in shape, someone wants to go to the gym and build their big muscles. Um, there's a certain amount of dukkha or uncomfortable or painful feelings they're going to have to go through to get that end result. So, they've got to, actually lift that heavy weight, and, it can be quite painful or putting forth effort, but it's a necessary thing if they want to get that certain result. So for some of us in the practice, there's going to be sometimes there is going to be this certain amount of um, dukkha which comes up. So, it's not something that if some uncomfortable feelings or something comes up, or you find yourself pushing against a certain kilesa, against a certain craving, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That is sometimes, necessary. We're working against things, this wearing away at our defilements, at our greed, our hatred, our delusion. It's not always going to be the easiest process, you know. So it's, for example, if you have a lot of anger to someone in your life, say someone in your life has really hurt you and has really wronged you, and just that point where you just like hear their name, and it's very difficult, and it's so you're holding on to this grudge against them. And when we have these like this grudge against someone, this anger against someone, it's a very painful feeling for us, even though it may feel justified, inside, because one of the things about anger is it can be so similar to wisdom. It has that ability to analyze and pick apart, and like, oh, he was wrong because of this, 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 and I was right because of this, this, this. And even if it's, say, objectively true, someone did something bad to us, when we hold on to that anger, that grudge to them, it's a very unpleasant feeling. Whenever anger comes up, it's unpleasant, and so holding on to this grudge against someone can be a lot of suffering. But, sometimes it can, to try to get over that grudge, there's a certain amount of suffering. To get over that anger, there's a certain amount of suffering or unpleasant feelings coming up. So, say, for example, you're trying to use loving kindness and spread loving kindness to this person, and when we do that, we can really change our perceptions of them. But it can be difficult. There can be this unpleasant thing because this person's done something bad to us. And I don't want to have to be like, may he be happy, may he be peaceful. So sometimes it can be there can be that kind of unpleasant thing. And you kind of got to go against the grain, go against what your your mind is your feelings or your reactions are telling you and go against that. Like when I lived with Lumpur Biak, when I first went to go stay there, my Thai wasn't very good. I couldn't really understand the Dhamma talks. I'd have to listen to a recording of it afterwards and, stop it every now and then and rewind and then stop. But I was at the beginning, this was just at the beginning, but I was able to start picking out words. And one of Lumpur Biek's favorite words was "foon," which is like to go against, to go against. So this is one of the words he just heard all the time, because yeah, when we're going against the way we feel, it can be difficult. So in the idea of, letting go of a grudge or letting go of that anger towards someone, initially it can be kind of difficult, and you have to really push against what the wants, the cravings, but the long-term results of it are going to be very positive. Not having that anger, not holding on to that anymore, being able to let go of that is going to be a very positive result. But and all this being said, one of the things we have to really also be aware of is that we're not falling into the other extreme of that idea that, oh, I'm practicing, so I should be suffering. I should be having dukkha coming up to really feel like I'm practicing. And this is something that people can't get into, especially, say as monks, like we do austere practices and stuff. So some monks will fast, some monks will go without sleep for the night. There's all these different practices we can do. And so sometimes there have been monks who have kind of kind of lost track of that, got a little too much into the austerities, too much into this like self-torture. And especially there was a certain generation of them which it was particularly bad. But that's not the way. It's not, we're not always supposed to be being discomfort, having dukkha from, and torturing ourselves. Like when the first thing the Buddha ever taught was the middle way. So in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, like the first discourse the Buddha gave, that's the one is when he taught the Four Noble Truths. And what we really emphasize on is the Four Noble Truths in that. But if you actually look at the sutta, the first thing he taught in that was actually the middle way. Before he got into the Four Noble Truths, he taught the middle way. And part of that is to avoid this self-torture, and avoid the two extremes of self-indulgence and self-torture and really work on developing this middle way. And so we don't want to get into over torturing ourselves when we practice. And you know I remember one senior monk was talking about when he was a junior monk and he had got really into these ascetic practices, and so he developed this feeling in his mind like, oh, I'll just torture myself into enlightenment. And that's not the way to do it. That's more like, there's certain other religious groups which teach stuff like that. And also, you want to be able to develop, certain amounts of happiness and contentment in our practice. Because again, our long-term goal is to remove suffering, but so there may be a little bit of suffering which is necessary for that, but the goal is to reduce the suffering, not increase the suffering. So you can also see this when the Buddha talked about for the development of concentration, development in our meditation. There's this really great teaching. He was saying that he said, Pamoja leads to piti, leads to pasadi, leads to sukha, leads to samadhi. So the first one, it starts off with pamoja means gladness. And so actually having that gladness, when you're meditating, it's not like uh, you go in there and like, you're just horrible, painful feelings or just real, you hate doing it or something, but you want to go with this mind of gladness. And so pamoja, that gladness, will lead to piti. So piti is a lot of times translated as rapture. So these are these feelings which can come up. Like sometimes it feels like your body's expanding. Sometimes it can feel like you're levitating. Sometimes people like that, their hair stands on end and their nose starts running. It's a very positive feeling which comes up. And then after that is pasadi. So this is like this like tranquility then arises. And then the next one, sukha, is like bliss or happiness. And then finally that leads to samadhi or that concentration. So it starts off with this just this gladness. And so, we even though in our practice there are times when there's going to be some more difficulties, more dukkha coming up, but generally we are working on developing gladness, contentment, happiness, and the eventual removing of all of our suffering. And so this is really the goal we're working towards. And and so, but on that way, there are going to be times when we do have to kind of go against our likes, go against our wants. It can be, again, it's the same. It's like, say someone wants to quit smoking cigarettes, you know, it's not always going to be easy. There's times where it's going to be difficult. They're going to get those cravings coming up and they're going to have to actually really like, no, I don't want to do that. No, I'm not going to give into that. And so it'll be the same with us, when some of these mind states, these emotions come up, some of these cravings come up, there's a point where it's going to be a little unpleasant. We're going to have to put forth that effort to say no, but the results of it is going to be good. It's giving up a lesser happiness for a greater happiness. It's a little bit of suffering now, but is going to help remove a lot of suffering later. So I'd like to offer this to everyone as a bit of a reflection this evening.